welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest has been a prosecutor, social worker, therapist, college professor, and mindfulness teacher, and he has studied under 72nd Taoist Master Hua Ching-Ni. As an author, he has written 2 books, Children of Abraham and I Am the Way. His name is Bob Martin, and my interview with Bob will follow the teleportation sound. Bob Martin, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you. It's a happy thing to be here today.
Feel free to tell our listeners about your spiritual background and your work as an attorney, professor, social worker, and addictions counselor.
Okay. They're kind of 2 different paths. So let me take them like one at a time. There's the career path and then there's the spiritual path. And of course, they do intertwine. But let me start with the spiritual. So my folks were Eastern European immigrants. My dad was Hungarian royalty. My mom was Roma Gypsy. The Bolsheviks killed off all of our ancestors on the Hungarian side. You know, everybody, wiped out the Romas. So they came to a place where it was just hard for them to believe that there could be a kind and good God that would allow that to happen. And they didn't want to believe in a ugly and mean God. So I grew up in what I'll call a non-theist environment, not atheist. It wasn't like we were against God or, certainly said there is no God, but it was just not a conversation that we had in the house. Although it was funny that my father, having immigrated here and been naturalized in 1932, he said to me in his Dracula-like accent, you are an American and you must learn the Bible stories. And so he would take me to children's Bible school so that I could learn the stories, but never went to service or anything like that. And life went on. We were an amusement park family. My folks had found that popcorn and cotton candy were their path to the American dream. And I became a lawyer. I think much to my father's dismay, being a middle-class businessman, he didn't like lawyers very much, but I think he was proud of me. And I wound up being a referral attorney to the Miami mob during the cocaine cowboy days. And I was hanging out with a lot of people that brought me to chrome and glass discotheques, and I was probably doing a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. And my life was going south. So I was seeing a therapist, and I came to a big crossroads in my life. And I came and I asked the therapist, his name was George, what should I do? What should I do? So he reaches behind himself and he gets out a bag of coins. And he starts throwing these coins and making mathematical calculations, and finally comes up with a number. I think it was 62, and opens up a book to chapter 62. And the title of the chapter is Retreat. And he shows it to me. So I promptly curse him out because I'm paying him $65 an hour, to be my therapist. And he's, consulting some mystical book, I guess. And I left, but it was the right advice. And I took it, and it saved me from going down a very deep rabbit hole. And I went back eventually and I said, what was that? And he said, that was the I Ching. And I said, what's that? And he goes, well, it's a Taoist practice. And I said, what's Taoism? And so I was introduced to his mentor. And also, he was the English language editor for a 72nd generation Shaolin master from the temple in China, Kung Fu, Tai Chi, all that kind of stuff. So I studied under Master Hua Ching-Ni for 8 years. And I took to Taoism very, very easily because it didn't require me to believe in anything I couldn't touch, feel, or experience for myself. But it gave me a North Star, and it gave me a way to go in life. And it taught me how to begin to find what Master Ni always called mastery. mastery. Mastery is like recognizing the situation that you're in and being able to align yourself with it appropriately. And that's the teaching of Taoism. So I ran into a little problem with my mob clients and found I had to move to North Carolina. And when I got here, there weren't a lot of Taoists, so I started to study Buddhism. Long story short, I eventually married a born-again, Bible literalist Southern Baptist woman. And she was and is a true saint. In Buddhism, we use the word bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a person that is of such amazing compassion that they would not go to heaven if given the opportunity, just so that they could stay on the earth to help other people get there. And she is a bodhisattva. But we couldn't really talk too much about our belief systems because she thought my stuff was just too weird, and I thought her stuff was a little too rigid, and we couldn't really communicate much. So I started taking some of the ancient Taoist writings and searching in the Bible for the similar teachings. And the more I looked, the more I found that they're all the same. You know, if you get away from the institutionalization, you get away from the organized religion, you get away from the my way or the highway and the exclusivity and the dogma, you get away from all that stuff. You just look at what is the basic teachings of how to live life. It's all the same. And so today, I guess I identify as a Taoist Buddhist Christian. I finally went to church and I found a real progressive church that she likes and I like. I got baptized. And now she's happy that I'm going to go to heaven with her because I've been saved. And I'm kind of happy she's going to be reincarnated with me. And so we joke about that stuff a lot. So that's my spiritual life. That was my spiritual story. The career story is a lot easier. I grew up kind of a large guy. I think that my people were Huns, really. The Magyars, which are the people that settled Hungary, really came out of Mongolia. So I've got a lot of Hun blood, and I'm a big boy. You could think of me as like riding on horseback, playing hockey with a lamb's head. Those guys, those are my ancestors. And it was hard getting through school because, for big guys, especially back in the 50s, they didn't make clothes for us. Had to go to J.C. Penney's, and my mom would walk in and scream out in her high-pitched Roma voice and accent, "Where's the husky section?" Embarrassed me. Anyway, grew up with them and was hawking games in the amusement park by the time I was 9 years old, and got up, found out that football was something that my body worked well with, and became a football player and went to Boston University when they had a football team, and played there and had a career-ending injury, became a hippie, lived in a hippie apartment. And my whole ambition in life, I think, was to sell hot dogs on the beach and sell enough hot dogs in the summer that I wouldn't have to work in the winter. And I had a friend that kept telling me I ought to be a lawyer. He went out, he got a job, and he earned enough money for me to pay for the LSAT, gave me a postal money order, said, "Go take this test." So I went and took it, and some law school took a chance on me and became a lawyer, worked for the DA in Miami, Janet Reno, for a few years, hit the mob for $72 million, then left that office. And then they came to me and said, "You got to be pretty good to hit us for that much money." I represented them for a while, and as I mentioned, had a little trouble with them, moved to North Carolina. But by that time, after studying with Master Ni for 8 years, I was a transformed person. I was a different person. I wasn't an arrogant, excuse my language, ass of a lawyer. And so I devoted myself to representing indigent folks for the next 15 or 20 years, and found, a much happier life, became certified as a meditation teacher, a happiness coach. And 2015, I retired from going to court all the time, although I still do a lot of pro bono work. And now I teach meditation. I teach at the university of Elon University. I teach undergraduates law, but I also and now have got an accredited meditation class on campus, a 2 credit class that I'm going to start teaching this semester, and I'm so excited about that because teaching law is okay. But teaching meditation, you actually see people transform. They begin to, you hear, oh, I didn't realize there were crickets outside my window, or oh, I don't have to do everything, or oh, I didn't know that. And you see these changes happen in the students, and I kind of get my life from that. Wow, I'm sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but there it is.
You've written 2 books. One of them is called Children of Abraham, and the other is called I Am the Way. Without spoiling too much of each of your books, what are them about? And can you tell our listeners about the inspiration behind each of your books as well?
Oh, thanks. I'd be happy to. Well, Children of Abraham was first published in 2008. To tell you the truth, it was self-published, but I'm really excited that a national publisher has just picked it up and is going to republish it shortly. And that Innovative Ink, which is a subsidiary of Kendall Hunt. But Children of Abraham, after 9/11 occurred, there were a lot of people going around killing folks in the name of God. The Muslims, Akbar Allah. And we were going over there to show that, God was on our side. And I was thinking, and again, my concept of God is basically above my pay grade. Yeah, personally, I'm convinced that there is a flow of energy, which is very Taoist. There's a flow of energy in the world, and that energy is a creative force. And I do, but I don't think of God as a human being with a long white beard. But to personalize God just for the moment, for the purpose of writing the book, I would say, would God really be up there thinking, well, that's not really what I intended for this world when I created it? So I thought, is there a way to bring God down so he could tell us that that's not his intention, but not do it in such a way that we immediately buy into it? So I came up with the idea that God would communicate with us by putting messages on the ticker in Times Square and on the bottom of the television, as the news crawls across the bottom of your TV. And there would be messages like, I had created the world as a Garden of Eden. See it that way, God. You're all my children, God. And these would be mysterious messages that would just somehow appear. And I created 7 characters based on the 7 deadly sins, sloth, greed, the like. And I had them all kind of intertwine their lives, kind of like the movie Crash, if anybody's ever seen it. So it's kind of like that. And, there's a fellow who's a sex addict, and there's a woman who just can't seem to find her voice. And there's a lawyer who's arrogant, and a Palestinian and an Israeli. And the funny part about it is I just went back and read the first couple of pages, and in the first couple of pages, and I wrote this in 2008, starts with Captain Nadav of the Israeli Defense Forces being ordered into Gaza to do a bombing run where collaterals are going to be killed. And I just thought, gosh, that was how many, 12, 16 years ago? And nothing's changed. But anyway, it's a fun summer read. There's nothing too deep about it. Most of the folks who read it really enjoy it. And the inspiration behind it was just kind of the hypocrisy that we live in the world of saying that, we honor and we respect life, and yet we go out and destroy it all the time. The other book that you mentioned, I Am the Way, Finding the Truth in the Life Through a Biblical Reinterpretation of the Tao. my attempt to write a Rosetta Stone so that my wife and I could communicate better about what we believed. And although we can't really, I mean, she literally believes in Noah's Ark and the Garden of Eden. And, she is a creationist and I'm an evolutionist. And we differ on those historical facts. But in terms of our values, we're very much the same. And so as I would take this ancient manuscript called the Tao Te Ching and transform it into a biblical poem, she would read it and love it. And so I eventually did that with all 81 chapters. And when she sat down and read it cover to cover, she looked up at me afterwards and said, preachers all my life have told me what to do and how to do and what's okay to do and what's not okay to do and what's a sin and what's not a sin. And they told me all about Jesus, but nobody ever explained to me who Jesus was and what he taught as much as I learned by reading your book. And I thought that was really high compliment. So Kendall Hunt, the people that are now publishing Children of Abraham, they heard about it by word of mouth, and they contacted me and they asked if they could publish it. And I said, my gosh, of course. And so they have, and it has been published and it's gaining some traction. And I guess the most wonderful thing for me is that I get letters from readers who tell me that they had left the church some time ago because of its exclusivity and the dogma, and it didn't coincide with science and other problems that the church is having adapting to the modern world. And in doing that, they also, left behind their relationship with the divine. And through my book, they're reestablishing that relationship outside of the confines of, a organized religious structure. And it's very uplifting for me.
How long did it take you to write each of your books?
Children of Abraham took about a year and a half. It was a novel, so it had a storyline. And so, the thinking and the process was, kind of just thinking through getting into the story. And I had models for my characters, like, for instance, Anthony, I'm sorry. But anyway, I had different actors that I kind of thought of as my characters. And I had little pictures up on my desk and I could look at them and look back and forth at them and think, what would they do next? So that was mostly fun. And it went pretty quickly. And I'd never written a novel before. So there was a lot of, things I had to learn. The other one, 81 chapters, each chapter requiring not only a lot of research into the Bible, but once I had the stuff, then forming the words into the same cadence and rhythm and rhyme as the original manuscript. That was labor intensive, and that took me 4 years.
You mentioned that Children of Abraham was originally self-published and is now going to be republished by, I believe, a traditional publisher. But is I Am the Way self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published?
No, it's traditionally published by the traditional publisher that now wants to publish Children of Abraham as well.
Okay. My next question is, how do you define mindfulness?
So kind of like mindfulness and meditation is kind of like ship and boat. You can put a boat on a ship, but you can't put a ship on a boat. So I would say that meditation is a part of mindfulness. It is meditation, I would say, is a more structured, intentional, defined, limited. It is a practice that has a definition to it. Mindfulness is a much broader word that I would say is intentional attention. Okay, intentional attention. A lot of people talk about being in the present moment, but that's kind of like, a vague, what's that mean, being in the present moment? So let's say you're driving along in a car and your mind is in default mode. It's thinking about what you got to do tomorrow and what that guy said yesterday and trying to remember whether you left the stove on and picking the kids up at school and I got to check this on my calendar and just going through all this blah, 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 blah. So that I would call not mindful. That's kind of mindlessness. But a nicer word would be you're in default mode. And that is a been with humankind, and it comes from our original need to scan the environment for danger when we lived in primitive environments. It's part of how the brain works, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. But let's say you're driving along and somebody comes a little bit close to your car, a little bit close enough to get your attention. Now, all of a sudden, if you look at this on a brain scan, you'll see that a different part of your brain lights up. When you're in default mode, it goes along kind of the very top of the joints of the two hemispheres, the electricity. But this will go to a specific place, and all of a sudden, you're attentive. You're looking. You're watching. You're seeing what's happening. You're trying to assess the danger. You're seeing if you need to make any move, and you're attentive. You're there. This is being in the present moment. You don't want to be in everybody thinks you got to be in the present moment all the time. That would be exhausting. But it's nice to be able to be in that kind of attentive mode when you want to be. When we're listening to somebody and all of a sudden we notice the mind wanders away and we're not listening anymore. Then we kind of realize, oh, I haven't been listening to what the guy said. Now I got to get back. That's intentional attention. When your mind goes out and wanders, that's mindlessness. When you're intending to give your attention to something, that's mindfulness. So what meditation does is it trains you to be able to move into a mindful state at will with ease. I think, that pretty much, yes, that's the difference.
I have one final question. As a business law and ethics professor, how do you incorporate mindfulness and ethical considerations into your curriculum, and what impact do you hope to have on your students by doing so?
Good question. So, I don't want to be critical of our educational system, and I don't want to generalize too much, but in teaching business law, what I am finding is that there has been a de-emphasis on the teaching of social sciences. And I get a lot of kids who come in and aren't relating the fact that law itself is an expression of the values of the society that creates the laws. So this requires a certain amount of mindfulness to be able to direct your attention to something like a law or a regulation or a rule and its consequences and its creation. And just like you asked me what inspired it and what consequences there are. And so one of the trainings in meditation that you have after you get the initial skill set, of being able to watch your thoughts, that one of the things that I try to get the students to do is to be mindful of the width and the breadth of these rules and regulations, and how they manifest themselves, and how they apply and their consequences. And so that all requires some intentional attention. But if I may, can I take a moment and ask you if you could ask me the question, Could I explain a little bit about what meditation actually is?
Go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of people think that meditation has something to do with quieting the mind or emptying the mind of thoughts or entering into a thing of tranquility or inner peace. And although eventually in the practice, those things do happen, and I would say that for me, being a practitioner, I practice every morning and I have for 2 decades. I do have a sense of inner peace and tranquility, but that's not the practice. It is the consequence of the practice. It A lot of people will sit down and they say, "Well, I've tried meditation. I sat down and try to sit quietly, but my mind was full of thoughts and I couldn't make my thoughts go away, so I'll never be able to meditate." And what they don't realize is that they actually did meditate, because meditation is not trying to not have thoughts. It's actually being aware of your thoughts and allowing them. And your mind is full of thoughts. Your mind produces thoughts the way your mouth produces saliva. It just excretes them. And so what meditation does is it gives you the opportunity to step back out of your thoughts and not be your thoughts. A thought comes up, you have judgment about something, and automatically that's your truth. That's who you are. That's your truth, and that's the truth. But it's not. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. And if you think about your thoughts for a minute, I don't know where they come from. They come from your database and your conditioning, and they come from, whatever input of data has come into your life. And they bubble up from somewhere, your subconscious, and then they're present for a moment, and then they bubble away and they're replaced by another thought. You can't hold them in your hand. You can't trade them. You can't buy them. You can't do anything with them. They're just... And then when you start thinking that these thoughts are running my life, it's kind of crazy. So what meditation lets you do is it lets you step back and kind of pulls you and pries you away from believing that you are your thoughts and coming to the understanding that you're not your thoughts, that you have thoughts. Hey, I had a thought. Well, who is the I that had the thought? So meditation reintroduces you to the creator of your thoughts. And by doing that, it gives you a chance to start to clean out the attic and let some of those thoughts go and kind of choose the thoughts that you want to have. And over time, not right away, but over time, whereas you used to see something and say, "Oh, I don't like that," now you'll see it and say, "Well, that's interesting. I wonder why that's happening," because that's a more happy place to be. And you chose to be responsive like that rather than having it imposed upon you by the world. So, and that's why I love meditation. It gives you a say in the matter of who you are.
Bob, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were a fascinating guest.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Thank you for doing what you do, because only by having podcasters and people, it ain't easy to have a podcast. I mean, you gotta be consistent. You gotta be deliberate. You gotta be on top of stuff. You gotta be there on time. You gotta find your guests. You gotta think up, prepare. What you do is a wonderful service to humanity. So I want to thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. Bob was a fascinating guest for this podcast. I apologize for the lull in podcast episode uploads in recent days and weeks. I've been battling a cold for the past several days, but I am starting to feel better now. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.